So it's been a while since you've heard my dulcet tones, but I'm back hopefully for a more regular session now with other things in my life, just kind of balancing out, maybe, possibly, who knows, into a routine. But anyway, today I wanted to talk a little bit about a variety of things that have happened over the last 4 or 5 weeks, including the Black Friday deals. So let's start with the most important one at this point, updates to games that we currently own. Ghost of Yotei, which I reviewed about a month ago on my channel, which overall was a good but safe sequel. It didn't really push beyond Ghost of Tsushima, and it didn't gel quite as well in terms of its story, its organic world building, and how all the side quests and the exploration of the world fitted together, as I covered in my review. Technically, it made some steps up and some improvements, but again, it didn't set the world alight, but it certainly is a good game overall. Go and check out my full review for all the great stuff inside that game in terms of technology, ray tracing, everything else. But Sony, and this time of year, means that if you push out updates, patches, Game Plus mode, which I did mention in my review should be in the game, is now there, then it can help sway that audience into a potential new Christmas purchase. They've also done what they should have done at launch, and again, as we keep saying for the past 10 years or so since I've started this channel, release it now, patch it later. So there are some features here that have been added. Maybe they were on their original delivery schedule and they just took them off the scope and de-scoped them to later on. Maybe they were a triage area, but now we have a VRR mode on both PS5 and PS5 Pro, which includes both a balance mode and the standard, which we've come used to now for Sony internal studios, is putting in a capped, an uncapped and a smooth mode. And effectively this allows you to choose between what's most important to you. Do you want a completely locked, capped 40 FPS, which kind of gives you the best image quality and a consistent delivery? Do you want to smooth it out so it just kind of stays as close to that as possible and allows scaling, so any minor dips will be smoothed out on the DRS level that the game has? Or you can just go full hog and say, do you know what, let it drop to the lower bounds as often as possible and let's get that frame rate right through the roof as much as possible. And that's what we're interested here, because that's effectively testing the hardware to see how fast it can run and certainly how good their DRS solution is. That's a very, very big part of why games do this, both on PC and on console, and therefore that's why it's important. Resolution scaling, upscaling, reconstruction mechanisms, as I've said for many a year, they're all going to become standard now. So what do we see? Well, we see pretty good results, specifically in the PS5 Pro. Now, the big win here is taking each mode and seeing what headroom is left over with DRS enabled on the performance. Resolution scaling wise, I expect the new mode to either lower the DRS range slightly below the previous level or just scale to that lower level more often. Now, the quality and performance modes will likely run higher levels due to the reduction of ray tracing, and the fact quality is still capped at a 40Hz refresh even when uncapped, as is the high quality ray tracing mode, which realistically just aligns to the new quality and ray trace balance mode, albeit they now scale with DRS rather than being a fixed, slightly lower resolution on both consoles. But you need VRR to enable these. I have got a much more detailed video that goes into this kind of comparison a little bit more, but I'm just going to skim over it here. But my full video is up on my Patreon supporters, so you can go and watch it there and join now and watch it quickly before it gets released to the public into a few days' time. So we get a 30% increase on the previous 30 FPS cap for a likely maybe 10 to 15% lower DRS range than before, although counts do come out at similar levels, around 1080p at the lowest level on PS5 and around 1296p on Pro. And this is true for quality and the ray trace modes. Now, from my tests, the 40 FPS levels are perfect and now negate the need for a 30 FPS mode if you have a 120Hz screen. Remember, you don't need VRR to turn these modes on. You only need VRR to have these options of uncapping, smoothing, and locking the frame rate beyond that 120Hz or 60 FPS levels. Now, riding, combat, wandering around, talking, or carrying pots all stay locked by and large in these 40 FPS modes and at that 25 millisecond intermediate frame time. But the caveat here is this new mode eats into the PS5 Pro's benefits, or at least minimises its attraction, as you can see here, as now base PS5 players can now enjoy the ray trace GI with that smoother and more responsive 40Hz mode, halving the gap between the old 30 or 60 choice with or without. But the biggest gains, and one that leaves this with the biggest gap between the two, which can be 100% faster best to best, come from that Ray Trace Pro mode and the performance mode on PS5 and Pro consoles. Now, in my tests here, we can almost achieve 120 FPS in the Ray Tracing Pro mode while looking at the sky, which uses PSSR, but in normal play, you're often sitting somewhere between the high 70s and low 90s, which aligns almost exactly the same in that performance uncapped mode. Riding around the vast landscape, slashing off limbs, impaling would-be criminals, offers a 30 to 55% increase on average over the previous 60 FPS ceiling of before, which actually ties up quite closely to the PS5, again, check out my full video for more on that. Now, it's a big increase. Again, there might be a small 10-15% DRS reduction on that base scaling, or possibly it just sits at the lower bounds more often. And I applaud these modes, as they offer choice for those that want to have the fastest, most responsive game, myself included, obviously where it makes sense, with a small hit to IQ, but also allowing those that want to stay with the sharpest IQ, or not have a 120Hz screen and a VRR screen, can just plug and play with a simpler 30-60 FPS choice. And the reason is to boost sales and interest over this Christmas buying period, which I welcome and totally understand. So if you're on the fence, then maybe this new patch, which also includes Game Plus, a replay of core duels and other enhancements in the game itself, may fall into your Christmas basket for a cut down price, of course. Anyway, it's a nice little patch before Christmas, and maybe we'll see even more titles getting released. But what really stands out for me there was how well you can compare the PS5 Pro to the PS5, because they're almost like for like, other than you can now uncap the frame rate and push it very hard. It'll be very interesting comparison as well for when the PC version launches. So the Steam machine, it's kind of been known for a while really, and its focus is really on the mobile market, the growing Steam into China, unofficially for now anyway, India and other growth areas such as Japan. So they've kind of gone with that, was built on what the Steam Deck was, but they've also got one eye on the laptop market, which is a growth market, and the biggest one I think for in terms of just footfall is Xbox. The kind of abandoned and disgruntled players, of which there could be, 10 to 15 million series owners, and a warm welcome for them to the market in terms of they probably don't feel that enfranchised to go with Sony, and therefore Steam is probably the one they're going to lead into, specifically if they could use a PC and get Game Pass running on Linux, and still keep their Xbox games on a new platform with potentially better specs or as good a specs as the Series X. So it's a clever move again from Valve. They really do think long and hard about what they do, and they do it well. Specs wise, okay, again, I've said this many times before, this is like consoles. This is likely the AMD overflow basket. They've designed the entire unit itself around cost efficiency, power, TDP and BOM cost, with kind of a minimum, I would expect, of maybe 5 to 10 million in their first year as an attainable market. So they've probably pre-bought all that up front. So that's the first thing to talk about in terms of the memory prices and everything else that's going on at the moment. And not just memory, there's a lot of problems in the tech market in terms of cost of the BOM, the cost of materials, cost of things that are shifting left and right, and certainly fabrication processes that are being swayed into cloud centers, AI specifically, and all of the heavy load that having virtualized boxes in DCs across everywhere in the world, always running, always spinning up. You need CPUs, you need memory. All those things are efficient because you've got so many serverless instances of things now that we build in the cloud in terms of our server infrastructure. For me, my job day in, day out, over the past 10 years, I've shifted away from dedicated boxes to just service. It's all SaaS based, it's all serverless instances, it's all keep things in RAM where possible, local storage on drives. So all these things have shot up in price. SSDs are all more expensive, DDRs more expensive. So I've got a full video on the Steam machine overall, which you can check out coming out in the next few days, and some of the footage here is from that video. But long and short of it is, I think Valve have done very, very well here to look at the market, look at where it's going. And as I said a couple of years ago, this is all around getting SteamOS. It's another route to market for SteamOS. They are a software company first and foremost. It's a continuation of their original plan with the Steam machine. So 10 years ago, it was third party back then, and they launched it with the Steam Link, which everyone seems to have forgotten about. But in 2015, that focus was to have a machine where you could play games and stream games to other devices as a companion. And they've built on that with the Steam Deck, and also their focus with the Steam Frame VR device they launched at exactly the same time, which is another interesting area. It's a new focus, again, like I said, on the mobile gaming being kind of assimilated, just like Proton did with Windows, but this time it's with their ARM FEC software conversion. And that solution looks excellent, and they kind of aim to solve the same problem with the x86 games running natively, in quotes, on hardware, with the operating system kind of extracted away from the specifics, which I think is an excellent way to do these things. One of the biggest problems in my space, and certainly in the game space, I can see it firsthand, and I've been saying it for a few years, is nobody really has low-level understanding anymore. And when I say low-level, I don't mean everyone needs to understand it. I used to write code from the Commodore 64, so I understood the registries, how the 64 worked, how the 68000 worked in the Amiga, how you could actually get things working with the blitter, the copper, understanding how there was different options within that hardware, the registries, the space, the bandwidth, all those things, the contention, how the bus works, how the memory works, what speed you've got between chip memory and fast RAM. Those things, I wouldn't say they're harder, they're more complicated. So there's more complexity in modern hardware, but most people I know that write code don't know anything about the hardware. They don't even understand things like registries or memory allocations. They just write code or they copy code and run it. And I think that here, with Valve and their expertise in the software space, their expertise in the Linux operating system and their own kernel, the fact that they control the kernel within SteamOS, which is built within a Linux distro, I just think this has the potential here to be an amazing piece of kit, just because of the specs of it are actually reasonably good for the target price. It's a Ryzen 8000 Zen 4 CPU, so effectively it's an 8540U 30-watt part. It's exactly the same as that, which is a laptop part. And again, it's paired with a 7600M laptop GPU with 8 gigs of GDR6 RAM. It's got 16 gigabytes of sodium DDR5, and just like a PC, it kind of differentiates itself more from the Steam Deck, which, remember, that machine is a 16 gigabyte LPDDR5 RAM shared across both CPU and GPU within a single pool, and then split logically within the system itself, not physically, all running from within a single APU. This machine's not. This is a discrete GPU and a separate CPU, and they're likely going to launch this around February 25th, and that will coincide with the Steam Deck's launch when that came out. And for price wise, I do suspect it to be above the PS5, but kind of below the PS5 Pro, so anywhere between $499, $599 in the UK, possibly $600 to $750 in the US and Euro markets. The thing that I want to lean into here, that I think, again, I've got a video coming up, so I'm not going to steal my own thunder, but SteamOS Proton, it's very good, and it gets progressively less impactful the higher up the power chain you go. Effectively, Windows is a massive power hog, so if you're memory constrained, CPU constrained, GPU constrained, bandwidth constrained, SteamOS is more efficient the lower down that stack you go, and it will shift left and right. Once you get to top end hardware, you're probably going to be much better off on Windows than you are on SteamOS, because all of those impacts that I've just mentioned don't hit it because you've got a load of headroom left over in the hardware. So anyone running out testing a 5090 and a 5090 with Windows 11 and SteamOS, just missing the point. And I see big tech channels doing it. I think Gamers Nexus just did one, and I'm surprised at them because they don't seem to understand what the hell they're testing for. Plus, I don't even think they really tested it against Windows. They just tested it against other hardware. I think that it's a fool's errand. This isn't a console, it is a PC, but it has console benefits. So this effectively is a low-level, highly optimized, focused piece of hardware that is built around the hardware that sits within it. Therefore, all of the layers that feed that can be managed and manipulated specifically, just like the Steam Deck, which punches above its weight, like the Switch 2 does. Because with Proton, they can focus the abstraction layer and the conversion layer between that and the Windows cores using Vulkan. Vulkan can be optimized in the back end, and they do this all the time, hence why they constantly have new versions of Proton, and you can run versions of Proton against different hardware and games and configurations to get different performance metrics out of it, because they're focused on the format and the methods of which that conversion layer is done and how efficient it is. But also, and this is what everyone seems to miss, it's the kernel. Windows 11 and 10 is shite. It's shite because it hogs CPU. It hops around on threads all the time. It doesn't manage its kernel allocation space all the time. It's very, very inefficient. And that causes problems in anything running on the operating system when you get contention. And with SteamOS, they solve most of those issues. So memory allocations are quicker. Memory streaming is quicker. The full video that I've got coming up will dig into it far more and give you real life examples on real hardware using the two operating systems like for like, and just the kind of differences you will see between them. I think people are expecting just top it. I mean, that's why I said about this Gamers Nexus test. It was silly. It's like, here's the maximum frame rate and the 1% lows. That's not testing anything. That is literally getting in a car and going in a straight line as fast as you can. That doesn't test anything. When you go around a racetrack, me as a motorcycler, it's not the straights, it's the corners, it's the braking, it's the combination of everything that you need to test. You need to test how the bike handles all the way around the track, on every corner, on every edge, coming out of corners, accelerating, standing the bike up, braking, turning on its nose, corner grip, edge grip. All those things are important. And for consoles, PCs, everything else, it's the same. Just doing one single test is irrelevant. It just gives you one example. It's one metric of a broader piece. But I see people who do standing still and testing the game and saying, this shot is 50 FPS, this shot is 70 FPS. I do that in my tests, but it's not the only thing I do. It's a metric to say, in these two examples, these settings make a change. That's where you do those tests. But if you're testing a game across two pieces of hardware, two pieces of software, a completely different operating system, you need to do more than just run a benchmark down a corridor, a fixed cutscene, or move around. You need to test everything. And that means play the game, allocate all of those issues, and look at it in real time. That's the only way you should be testing these things. And again, this video I'm doing, some of the videos you can see running up on the screen, they will show you how beneficial SteamOS can be and how impactful it can be. And also, at times, where it just won't fix everything because the game itself has too many problems. So it's not a silver bullet, but it does mean that the hardware, I believe, will be more performant than people really understand at this point, specifically around that SteamOS and Proton level. So looking forward to seeing that. Hopefully I can get on the review code hardware side and hopefully get a review unit from Valve. I have reached out to them, so if anyone from Valve is watching this, do please contact me directly. I'd love to have a chat with you guys and hopefully get access to early hardware to do a full in-depth review on it. I think it's amazing, and anything that pushes SteamOS, but anything that pushes Linux more into the mainstream for me is a win-win-win. So definitely looking out for that, and I'm looking forward to covering it. And keeping on that theme, and actually, again, mentioned it in my video. So in the video that's been made and will be up for patrons around about now or in a day or two, then later on for everybody else, I talked about the fact that I think that the Steam machine is going to rely heavily on FSR4, and only this week did I see the fact that FSR4, the Redstone kind of update to Proton's been managed out by, I don't think the developer works directly for Valve. He might do, but I think it's his own independent company. He does this kind of stuff on the side, but it is Proton, so it's an official Valve-owned application. So they are developing it, they are funding it along with another company. But they're building on this with the official Proton conversion layer from Valve itself. So they've just got a big update. I think it's version 3.0, 2.0. I'll have to check. It'll be on screen now, so you'll see it. And this adds support for the required WMMA intrinsics, which the RDNA 4 uses for FSR4 to work, and it effectively flips them over to, I think, int8 floating point 16. So it uses FP8 on the RDNA4 to make it more efficient, so that uses less bandwidth, fits in the caches, therefore it's all local storage, it's the hierarchy. So again, all these things are more efficient when you've got your large language model, which is all local. You do it all in one go, intrinsically on the hardware itself, and that's what makes these things more efficient and better, because they're not going out to RAM and wasting bandwidth and all the extra electricity. So they're mimicking that with the levels within FSR3, which is what the Steam machine is using. So these have been mapped to the Vulkan equivalents, and although the dev himself states it's very, very early and hacky days in terms of what he's doing, it is starting the process to get this out into the community to gain feedback, to refine it, and then it can be used in theory with other non-RDNA4 based GPUs. So that 7600M RDNA3 inside the Steam machine, that's its target. That is definitely its target. But also, I think people are missing the biggest one here, which is the fact that this is to furnish and deliver SteamOS. So everything they do is to deliver SteamOS. They can start on AMD because all their stuff's open source, or at least accidentally or intentionally. So they can get open source stuff out. So therefore, if SteamOS were to say, I don't know, become an application available on Steam Market, for example, for £10, £20, £30, how many people would buy it if they could run it on their machine and had very close to better stroke worse performance than current Windows 11 if you've got AMD hardware? And then it will then incentivize Nvidia to lean into Valve and start giving them the tools to their kingdom so they can make Proton layers that manage the Nvidia side, because that's a market and that's a growth area. All these things are what Valve are doing. They are knocking on the door of taking away Windows as a full. They won't replace it in a business space, not quickly. That's not the problem. Linux is everywhere in terms of business spaces, and it's not a problem. It's not an issue. Mac OS, I mean, there's so many people that use Mac. It's a great operating system. I use it on one of the laptops at work. But this is a gaming market that Windows will lose. It's a huge portion of their revenue, and certainly, let's be honest, their data gathering solutions that they make money from, because that's what it's all about. Steam won't do that, or at least they won't do it to the same level. And if they make these things work on their own hardware, by proxy, it will work on more hardware, wider hardware configurations. As I just mentioned, the Steam machine is a PC. Split memory pools, allocated like a PC, will run on various hardware. By them adding all these functions in, and later on NVIDIA stuff, then they'll have the ability to have drivers and Proton versions that are specific to those, and therefore SteamOS will be more attractive to more people that don't want to buy a Steam machine but do want to convert their current machine to a Steam machine. So yeah, that's why they're doing it. That's my opinion. Then this just continues that whole journey of Valve. They stop, they think, they collate. They're not stock market driven because they're not on the market. They're not shareholder driven. They're not chasing the market and doing silly things. They take their time. They've got a huge revenue stream that comes in from Steam. That keeps them, their coffers fed, keeps them all going. I think they're the most productive company in the world at the moment in terms of headcount. That was just recently announced as well. So yeah, interesting times ahead. And I feel that this is just Valve pushing on with that machine in terms of getting more and more options around SteamOS. It will suit their hardware, absolutely. It will fund and help also the VR stuff that they're doing with Steam Frame, but it will also help SteamOS reach a wider market and become more embedded, better performant across a wider selection of hardware. That's the point of all these things. I did mention Black Friday deals, and I just wanted to talk about Black Friday deals. So I'm not going to go into them, but I found it quite interesting looking at the market in terms of the discounts. So you got all the standard TVs, £100, £300 off, and it's all overclockers had loads of stuff off on hardware. But I've worked in the retail market both behind the scenes in terms of the WMSs and the 3PLs that I work with in terms of shipping. So I'm saying something that's not changed since the 90s, which is sales are largely a load of crap. They're not real. They never have been real. What sales are mechanisms to draw attention around times when you want revenue or you want to shift stock. Okay, that's basically what it is. So example here is I bought something earlier this year. It was a PSU and some RAM, and in the Black Friday deal, it's actually £4 more expensive than what I bought it for earlier in the year. But that's why you always see these things like was for sale for this price in the last 30 days, last 60 days, since March 2023, whatever they put in their ad. They always caveat that so that they can cover themselves. So a lot of the deals, they all look pretty standard, and there wasn't a load on there. There was some, not a lot of AMD stuff in terms of GPUs. The best one I saw, I think, was £140 off, down to 660 quid for the 9070, and I think the 5070, which is £81 off, I think it was. Yeah, £81 off. So there wasn't a huge amount in terms of the PC space, in terms of bargains. There were bits and bobs, absolutely. 9800X 3D, I think, at 30 quid off. But again, I bought that for less. That was the thing that I bought for less. So the 9800X 3D I bought for £4 less than what it sells for now at 390 quid. I bought it for 386 quid earlier in the year from the same market, from the same place. But that's a Black Friday deal, which is £6 more expensive, £4 more expensive than it was earlier in the year. So all those things aside, the bit that I was trying to focus on is there's discounts out there. There is actually price discounts. But what I found interesting was what Sony, Xbox, and Nintendo are doing or not doing, as the case may be. So with PlayStation 5, you got huge discounts. You can now get the PS5 digital for 290 quid in the UK. So that's almost half price of a Switch 2. You can get the original fat model for 390 quid, is it? 370 quid, which is £100 less than a Series X is in the UK. And they're not doing anything. They're like a tenner off, 20 quid off. It's nothing. It's just stock that's sitting there. And Sony have got discounts on PSVR 2, and they've also got discounts on games everywhere. They've got this dynamic price thing going on where people get certain deals and on the subscriptions, which is quite annoying. Which you know, if you're a brand new subscriber, you get all these 30%, 50% off deals where you can get it for £70, £80 for the year rather than £120 for the year. But if you're like me and you subscribe every year, I get nothing. I get no discount or nothing. So that's a bit of a shitter, in my opinion. It would be good for people like me that are the top end, the whales, effectively, that are paying that yearly fee. At the end of the year, we go, for your renewal, if you do next year, you get 20% off. But then it would feel like you're getting a pat on the back for being a long-term customer. That would be a good thing for them to do. I get it. It's about growing the market, and it's like insurance. Every year you've got to go around and do the same cycle again and renew with somebody else. But it is a bit of a shite situation where that happens. And then Xbox, they're doing nothing because they just need to get revenue out, and basically they need revenue in. So they need to fill up their coffers because they're not in a good place. And you can see that, as I said before in that video I did last year, beginning of the year, February, March, which is stakeholder driven. This is what happens. The market's gone. Xbox are no more, and they're just now a publisher, and they need revenue. Hence the croc box shoes that came out that got announced. But on the other hand, Nintendo, they're doing absolutely nothing, completely anemic. The Switch 2 has got a whopping £20 off the Mario Kart pack to 410 quid, and a measly tenner off the base pack, now 385 quid. So Nintendo aren't playing the same game as Sony at all. In their profit margins, we are making money on every box, and we don't need to sell them for less than what they're going out the door for because they're selling like hotcakes. And games are being discounted, and the Switch is kind of awash with games that are on there, but no big hitters. A lot of third parties are coming to it, and that's great. And in fact, the only big one that I think is coming out this year is Metroid Prime 4, which is I'm going to review it here on my channel, so covering that on the Switch 1 and the Switch 2. But that's not going to see a penny cut from it. I think it's 42 quid for the Switch 1 and 50 quid for the Switch 2 that I bought it for. So again, that's Nintendo. They don't care, and it feeds into this whole piece of where the market is, because there's only 2 console players now. There literally is only 2. We've gone back to just Japan versus Japan. So it's Sony versus Nintendo of old. And in Japan, you know, whether you like it or not, Xbox has never even registered anything. It's not even on the floor. But Sony is dead, effectively, in Japan. It is so small compared to Nintendo. They own the market. And the Famitsu put their weekly sales out, software, hardware, which you can see on screen. Famitsu magazine, which is obviously it's been the king of Japan's sales forever. And I think, look, the top 10 games, only one of the games is a PS5 game, and that's Call of Duty Black Ops 7. And that's potentially just a bunch of Americans living in Japan that have pushed that up so high because they've all gone out. Because I doubt Japan's big into Call of Duty Black Ops games. So that's probably a reflection of students and people living over there that are non-national that's pushed that in, and next week it'll drop back down again. But everything else is a Switch game, and not just Switch 2, Switch 1. So Pokemon Legends, Dragon Quest 1 and 2, Dragon Ball Sparkling, Dragon Ball Sparkling Zero. It's just bonkers how ahead of the game they are, but also hardware. The Switch 2, the Switch 3, as in the Switch original OG, the Switch Lite and the Switch OLED, all sell more than the PS5. And, well, aside that, I think, yeah, the Switch, it won just under the Switch, the PS5. But the PS5 Digital and the PS5 Pro, surprisingly enough, again, pretty high. And that's probably tied to Black Ops 7. People going out and buying a Pro to play Black Ops 7 because it's enhanced. And again, it might not even be all national. The hardware, I mean, the Xbox is just mad. It's not even 1,000. It's not even 500. It's just crazy. The delta between Nintendo and Sony is as big as I've ever seen it. It's absolutely crazy. And at the moment, the way that the momentum's going, this is where Sony are. This is why they're leaning heavily into getting all these Chinese markets, getting more and more people they're doing this game, with the Horizon being announced on mobile markets to draw people in for the MMO type games. They are losing hand over fist to Nintendo, and they know it. So they need to lean into it. And I think the only way they're going to do that is they've got this new Japan only locked. It's a region locked again. We've gone back to that. It's locked by the language. It's discounted. So it's discounted, ironically, to just under the cost of the Switch 2. I wonder why. And this is what I find interesting in the market is what Sony are doing is really trying hard to make as much revenue as possible. So basically fill up their coffers for the battle that is to come. And that battle that is to come is against Nintendo. There's no argument. There's no fight with anybody else anymore. And I think that it's interesting to see that Nintendo don't see it as a threat. They are literally making money hand over fist. And I think it's quite interesting where the market is, because if you look at the Japanese market and the games that are there, it's the most alien I've ever seen it compared to everywhere else in the Western world. Don't get me wrong, the Japanese market has always been very unique, and the Western and Eastern markets have always been very different. But there used to be crossover, specifically back in my day when, you know, the 80s and the early 90s, when you had arcades, you had games that were big in Japan and big over here. So Outrun was big there, Space Harrier. You had loads of games that would have been the Mega Drive was a crazy situation where the Mega Drive wasn't that big in Japan, but it was massive everywhere else. And the Saturn was not big everywhere, but massive in Japan. So it's almost ironic that we've got a situation again where we are completely and utterly on different ends of the scale between the West and the Eastern markets. And Sony, I think, are focused on that market now. They're not focused on this market, and they're doing enough to keep it going. So my whole point of this conversation is I'm not too sure that Sony are keeping both eyes on both sides of the table. This is what companies end up doing a lot, is they win a market and then they focus on the one they're losing or they want to gain at the expense of the one they already own. And this, I hope, is not what Sony are doing. They're not using this market to fund the fight over in Japan, China, and everywhere else. They're using it to basically fill up the coffers to have a much broader spread of hardware, software, and solutions for everybody in both markets. But right now, they've got an uphill battle against Nintendo. They've got a very, very big battle. And with the numbers that I'm seeing now, the Switch 2 could achieve bonkers figures in terms of its year-to-date sales. I mean, in Japan at the moment, its year-to-date sales is 2.7 million. And the Switch is still sold 1.3 million, which is significantly higher than the PS5. Both of them, year-to-date, from January. So it's crazy to me that we are in a situation where Xbox is dead and been murdered by Sony, but relatively Nintendo's beat them both, and I think that's quite interesting. It'll be interesting to see where Sony goes from this, and some of it's their own making with some bad decisions, some of it's the choices they've made on both game types, game styles, focusing on the wrong things, all of the lean into online gaming and GAS services and just trying to again chase the market, which I always find is the worst thing to do. Once a company chases the market, they 9 times out of 10 lose. You either lead or you die. And I think Sony have lost that leadership. And I think that Sony and PlayStation, they're keen to get that PlayStation brand back, to expand that into a bleeding market, and specifically in Japan, where the PS5 is but a footnote to their PS1 and PS2 heyday. And they've beaten everybody in this game. Remember, when they came into the market, they were written off before they started. Everyone kind of laughed at them and said, Sony know nothing about games. I remember it vividly. I remember thinking, yeah, maybe they do, maybe they don't. And then when we very first saw the original one, I think it was Edge magazine where we first saw it, where I first saw glimpses of the power, or at least what was being pushed out there. And then in my job at the time, I saw the discs that came out before launch in 95. It was quite clear that they were making some serious strides into doing something special. But that Sony doesn't exist anymore. And the reason I'm saying that is because it's people. It's people that make a company. It's people that make games. It's people within. And the passion for it seems to have gone. And I hope that they get that back by employing the right people, focusing on the right things, and creating brands and bringing old brands back. They've got a lot of things that they could do. And they could certainly take a note or two out of how Nintendo handled their franchise and IPs. But this isn't a doom and gloom conversation. This is, I hope we get back to having lots of competition. Sony has competition in Nintendo, and they both target and push in each of their respective markets. And generally, we all benefit from it by having great games, lots of new content in terms of styles of games, pushing things forward. FromSoft to this company that keep getting picked by Japanese teams to make games, and even American teams in terms of Activision, they use them as well. So a lot of the things that push huge industry shifting IPs and brand new styles of gameplay tend to come from Japan even now. So, Dark Souls was Japanese from software. That kind of created its own genre. I mean, they started shoot 'em ups with Space Invaders. They started beat 'em ups with Karate Champ, and then later on Street Fighter 2, which reinvigorated the world. They started racing games. They pushed 3D racing with virtual racing. Literally, Japan inspired so many things throughout the generations of video games, right up to and including the PS2 and beyond, that it's almost as if if the Japanese weren't around making games. I mean, everyone says that Hideo Kojima created the kind of cinematic game, and he didn't, but he certainly popularized it and reinvigorated it into a style that was not standard. We're playing cinematic games years before then, things like Cinemaware and Defender of the Crown, and certainly other titles like Delphine and their titles from Future Wars and Crucible Corps, and obviously the Lucasfilm games. And obviously first-person shooters, a lot of people say Doom, id Tech invented that. They didn't, but they kind of, again, popularized it a little bit like Hideo did with Metal Gear Solid. So most things in terms of genres of games came from Japan, not from America, not even from Europe. So that's where we are with video games. They almost single-handedly create. I mean, I'm forgetting the biggest one almost there in terms of platformers. From they certainly put them on the map with Nintendo and Donkey Kong. So yeah, it's obviously that's not everything's not as simple as I just said. I'm generalizing it, but Nintendo, Sony, Sega, Namco, Capcom, so many Japanese companies from software, I go on and on, have basically created Taito, Irem. You can go, I'll just go on forever throwing names out. The fact is that we wouldn't be anywhere without them. And I hope that we get back to those halcyon days. And I think that we've got a situation now where Sony don't innovate anymore. I think the best thing they've made for the past few years is Gran Turismo, one of their oldest franchises. It's amazing. That is how you do a GAS service. And it'll be interesting to see whether or not they reinvigorate themselves and split themselves up so they make things specifically for the Japanese market with the new digital console, with it being region locked going back in time. That's a good thing. But also make sure that they push new IPs and new technology at this side of the fence so that they compete. And I think the PS6 will be make or break for them in terms of what they do. And I think you can see what they're doing. I said this before it got launched in terms of the PlayStation Portal. That is them looking at the market and where it's going and understanding that not everyone wants high-powered machines. And I've said this before, shrinking hardware down to get great quality, desktop quality in your hands and having that choice to dock it. Nintendo were there first, but Sony could certainly make a big play in that space, as we just mentioned with the Steam machine and the Steam Deck. I think that's where Sony are going. They are trying to learn from where other areas are and expand their market into many places as possible. Hence why you get PC games to fund all that. So a lot of it is a revenue stream, I think, to fund big changes in the future. So fingers crossed I'm right, and it's not just Sony just taking loads of money off the market and just making huge amounts of money for the stakeholders. We'll wait and see. But right now, in Japan, Nintendo dominate. It's gone right back to the 80s, early 90s when they ruled the roost until Sega made them shake and panic a little bit. That's that done. And I think that'll probably just about do it. We probably just have gone over the half an hour, 40-minute mark, and I've got other things I have to do, and I always do this, and I never get... There's so many videos I've recorded that I don't put out. It's just crazy. So I'm going to finish this one here. There were some other bits I want to add in here, but I'll do it for another video. You've seen already that I've got quite a lot of things in the pipeline that are coming up very shortly, so do check out my Patreon site if you want to support me for this, anything else that I do. Remember, I'm self-funded, independent, yada yada yada. So any comments and links and shares and stuff down below. Subscribe to the channel to get my numbers up, that really helps. And fundamentally, it's around making sure that I get an opportunity and a reason to keep coming back and doing these things if you find them useful and beneficial. But I have got quite a lot in the pipeline in terms of things that I'm doing in all areas, and hopefully quite a lot over the December period that will help a lot of people out, and also just educate, entertain, enjoyable, nostalgic stuff, new stuff, technology focused stuff, lots and lots of things that I've been burning away for a while. So yeah, hopefully it's all good and you enjoy it. Anyway, I've got to go, but remember, if you are a patron supporter or want to become a patron supporter, you can get your questions on this here. I did have one question, but I want to answer that more fully into a full video, and I'm not even going to say what it is, so I will be covering that in a specific episode, specifically around the subject matter that was asked. So if you ask that question on Patreon, you probably know which one I'm talking about. It'll be a whole full video, so well done that individual, and I'll comment in the video when it comes out shortly. Anyway, I'm out, and I'll catch you all very soon over here or over on IGN. And I'll catch you, hopefully, in the Christmas period for lots and lots of good stuff to come. Have a good one. Speak to you soon. Take care.